I want to talk about USA Gymnastics for a moment and the athletes that were traumatized and in many cases sexually assaulted and abused by the very people that were tasked with training them. The people they are supposed to trust. Young girls in many cases, kids, most of them, dealing with something like this. It's just shocking. Late last week, former Olympic coach John Geddert, this guy right here, killed himself before his day in court. He had at least 24 charges that he was facing. I was upset when I saw this news because he will not be in court. These girls will not get justice now. But as Sarah Klein, one of the gymnasts abused by both Geddert and Larry Nassar, said, quote, "There is no greater admission of guilt than John Geddert taking his own life." Geddert was an enabler for Larry Nassar, the team's doctor who assaulted literally hundreds of girls. Again, young girls, many of these girls, just little kids. I've got a little girl myself. She's 4 years old. She's in tumbling right now. We take her there every single week. That's early gymnastics, tumbling. That's where they start. And this story just shocked me and appalled me. Gymnastics is something that parents should want their kids to do. It teaches them so many good things. I can't imagine what it must have been like for these girls to be in the same room with somebody like Larry Nassar, that guy right there, disgusting, despicable human being, day after day, week after week. Like Randall Margraves, who had 3 daughters victimized by Larry Nassar and took matters into his own hands, or at least tried to. I cannot say, by the way, that I blame him for this. Take a look.
I would ask you to, as part of this sentencing, to grant me 5 minutes in the locker room with this demon. Would you do that?
That is not.
Yes or no?
No, sir.
Would you give me 1 minute?
You know that I can't do that. That's not how I do those.
Well, I'm going to have to get started.
Now, Larry Nassar, look at him, coward. Looks scared there. He should look scared. Pathetic human being. USA Gymnastics failed our children and our country, and something like this should obviously never be allowed to happen again. And anyone who knew anything about the abuse that took place for years and years should be held accountable. Rachel?
Rob, we're going to continue that story. The story of USA Gymnastics, the incredible mismanagement, is sickening as it is absurd, as you pointed out. For the victims, that pain will shadow their entire lives. Joining us now is Larry Nassar's first known victim, someone who was abused by both Larry Nassar and John Geddert, as Rob mentioned, Sarah Klein. Sarah Klein joining us now this morning on Wake Up America. Sarah, we thank you for joining us, and we thank you for your courage this morning.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Now, when you said there is no greater admission of guilt than John Geddert taking his own life, what was running through your mind when you heard Thursday's news?
You know, Thursday started out on a high. We were absolutely thrilled that he was finally going to be charged. Larry Nassar was the first piece of this story, but John Geddert was the second piece of this story. And in many ways, John Geddert was far worse than Larry Nassar. And so we were really excited on Thursday morning that he was going to be held to account. And then obviously he took his own life and took the easy way out. And it's very true to form for John Geddert. Nobody tells John Geddert what to do. He lived his life with that arrogance and with that above the law mentality. And that's until his final moments, really.
I read once that you said that Geddert's abuse, his physical and psychological abuse, was worse, as you kind of just mentioned there. Why did you say that compared to Larry Nassar?
You know, John Geddert broke us down. He broke the spirit of a child. He, berated us, screamed at us, yelled at us, hurt us, hit us, told us we were worthless and that we should go kill ourselves if we didn't, for example, point our toes on a gymnastics move. Then he sends you back to Larry Nassar, and Larry is kind, loving, has a nice, uplifting word for you, hugs you. And so at least Larry pretended to love us and care about us. John, not so much.
I can't imagine the situation you and so many women went through, as now when you compare them and say, well, Larry was kind to us, so it wasn't as bad. It's so heartbreaking to hear. And there was a powerful moment in your testimony against Larry Nassar when you said you chose to take from me, from all of us, something that was simply not yours to take, a shaken, if not irreparable sense of self, a grave inability to trust, calling it a robbery. What was that moment like for you?
You know, that moment was a reckoning. You know, the entire paradigm of your childhood explodes when you realize that someone that you love and trusted was actually sexually abusing you. It was a moment I needed to be between Larry and I. I mean, we all grew up together. I was 8 when I met these guys. Larry was in his 20s. John was in his early 30s. We were in a small town of Lansing, Michigan. The fact that, you know, you all even know the names Larry Nassar and John Geddert is still very surreal to me. So that was the first moment where I actually got to look Larry in the eyes and say, I know that what you were doing was not love and you didn't care about me. And it was powerful. I mean, he was crying. I was trying not to cry because I wanted to take my power back and I wanted to reclaim my voice. And I was up there not as a 30-some-year-old woman, but I was up there for that 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old little girl that I was back then who had her childhood essentially robbed by both Larry and John, the good cop and the bad cop, who figured out how to enable each other to abuse and to get what they both wanted. And it's really tough stuff.
Your story gives me chills, Sarah. I know you're a mother, and I heard you once say, as you were just talking about, you were 8 years old. You said you felt guilty yourself, asking what would have happened had you spoken up when you were 8 years old, something we can never expect a child to do. But can you tell us how you overcame that? And perhaps if someone is watching today carrying that similar guilt that is just a burden that is not theirs to bear, what would you tell them?
You know, I would tell them, number one, this is not your fault. You know, when you're 8, you don't have a fully formed brain. You don't have words. You don't have language. And the most healing thing that I've done and that I recommend to any survivor out there is to give some meaning to what you went through, some meaning to your suffering. And so here I am as a lawyer representing now survivors of sexual abuse, and I'm walking them through the legal process and making it a little bit easier and more empathetic and you know, a more gentle experience. And so I'm giving some meaning to what happened to me. And so it didn't happen in vain. And I've gotten to the point where I can actually have some gratitude for what I went through, because what I'm doing now is exactly where I'm supposed to be. And if I can help other people get through this, then it sort of makes it worth it for me.
What an inspiration. That type of takeaway from what you went through, starting at 8, carrying that burden for decades, and then getting your moment against Larry Nassar, now being able to speak out about John Geddert. And I have to ask you, Sarah, up until this summer, you were known as Victim 125 in court documents. Now you're known as Sarah Klein, and you put a face and a name. And as you mentioned earlier, you took back that power. What was it that finally made you decide to do that?
You know, you touched on it earlier. I'm a mother of 2 little girls, and I didn't want my story to be one of being a victim. And so it took me some processing to get that courage to be able to say, now I'm ready. Now I've sort of reconciled, you know, what happened to me, and I'm ready to use my voice. And I have to. I have a duty. I have a 3-month-old and a 5-year-old little girl. And to think that my 5-year-old is a few years off from where I was when I started being abused daily for the next 17 years of my life, you know, I have to speak out. I have to do things like this in order to just keep children safe. You know, when people ask my daughter, what does your mom do for a living? She says she keeps children safe. And so I'm on a mission, and I'm going to keep speaking out in order to do just that.
Her mommy is a hero and an inspiration. And I know that the world must feel a little safer for you right now, knowing these 2 men can no longer harm girls like your daughter. I thank you so much for joining us, Sarah Klein, and for being brave, as we mentioned earlier, and continuing to share your story and making the world a better and safer place. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, you're watching Wake Up America. We'll be right back.
Hi, Emma Reckenberg here. If you like this video, there's a whole lot more to see on Newsmax TV. You can watch for free right here on our YouTube live stream and be the first one here each time our experts break down real news. Just hit that subscribe button, ring the bell icon, and stay with us on America's fastest growing cable news channel, Newsmax TV.